it's a pleasure for me to see so many people who are here to listen to a talk about the Odyssey. Sir, it's okay. All right. So I'd like to spend some time talking to you about what happened a long time ago, and we might just get ourselves started with a kind of timeline. Think about the now, which I almost never do, but there it is. There is such a thing, I'm told. Go back to Rome, 2,000 years ago, to the first century before the Common Era. Take another 500 years before that, and you get to classical Athens. Another 200 years before that, and you get to 250, you get to Homer's time, the poet that we're going to talk about mostly. Homer himself was writing about something that was already ancient history. The Trojan War in tradition had taken place some 500 years before Homer wrote anything down about it, and it's this constant search for something behind that I think is an important piece of what it is I'm going to talk about today. This is, as far as we know, Homer, or someone of the same name. The old joke goes in my field. We have no idea whether this is actually a fair representation of Homer. By the classical Athenian period, they had an idea of what he looked like and started representing him in statues like this. In other words, a couple hundred years after the fact, the Romans picked these up, and this is a Roman copy of a Greek original that, thank goodness, we still have, but we don't have that much more than the tradition to what we know about Homer. What we do have are these two magnificent epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, tens of thousands of lines of beautiful hexametric poetry that survives to us that describes with rich intensity the world that Homer wanted to talk about. It also describes, to some extent, the world that he lived in. These are 500 years apart, remember, so we're going to have some conversation about the world that he himself was situated in and also the world that he was imagining 500 years before himself. The world that he was imagining was centered on the Trojan War. We'll talk some about that today. And if I were giving this talk 150 years ago, I would probably start off by telling you that the Trojan War is, as far as we know, a mythical event. There's no evidence that corroborates that anything like a Trojan War ever happened, and we just kind of have to go from there. We put it in the past fanciful set of stories that probably don't have much to do with reality. Then along came Heinrich Schliemann in the later part of the 18th century, who went over to a spot in ancient Turkey that was a traditional site for where Troy was supposed to be located. Lo and behold, there was a massive citadel there of a very wealthy city. Lo and behold, it was conquered many times and substantially conquered right around the time of Homer's Trojan War. So given that the work that was done uncovering that, we can now say that there probably was a serious cataclysmic kind of Greek war event against people that may well have been the Trojans that lived at a site about where the Trojans traditionally lived about the time of the traditional Homeric War. Schliemann and his colleagues, some of whom included folks from our own university, were trying hard to find anything that they could find to attach their site directly to Homer's legend, but unfortunately there was never found anything like, a spear that said this belongs to Achilles, or, Priam slept here. There were no markers that could specifically tie any specific events in Homer's epics to the site that Schliemann found. However, it's fair enough to think that this is a massive historical event that sits behind the Homeric stories. Now, the Homeric War is situated in the Mediterranean. This is a body of water that scholars have in recent years studied just in and of itself. There are cultures around this great body of water. If you ever one day landed in Rome on an airplane and rented a motorcycle, something I recommend that you do, you could drive around and notice the cultures that you would see in the contemporary world, from the Italians to the French, to the Spanish, to the North Africans, all the way across from places that go back to ancient Carthage, Libya, down to Egypt, Algeria, across into the northern areas with the Israelis and the Turks, and now back through the Greeks and round to the lowlands, or the Balkans, and into Rome again. Think about the number of substantial, historically important cultures that surround that body of water, and there's a kind of something extra that comes from being situated there. And that's been studied by Nicholas Purcell and other historians in recent decades to remind us that what's happening here and to the cultures all around it, including my beloved Greeks, is not because any of them is in isolation something magnificent and special. It's because they're all in collectivity something magnificent and special. This is a linked world, and it's linked via this medium of the sea. Traders from all over parts of the Mediterranean were trading with many others, and these links create cultures that are interconnected. A networked mind is an intelligent mind, is sometimes a slogan that people like to say today out of Palo Alto. This absolutely happens in antiquity as well. These cultures cross-fertilize each other, have different ways of looking at things, and these differences help catalyze a tremendous amount of social and cultural creativity. Now, the Trojan War itself is a dark place. We won't spend that much time there, but we need to start. There's 100,000 warriors, Greek warriors, launch over, spend time, 10 years, trying to conquer this massive citadel. It's a siege, and the Greeks expend lives and the Trojans expend lives. We get to see men hurtling against each other, and all of them inevitably toward death, trying to make sense of a universe that seems to be completely off-kilter. The war is told in Homer's tale in the Iliad as a struggle, which is apt and appropriate. However, it's not a struggle between Greeks and Trojans. It's the story that Homer wants to tell is a struggle between a Greek and another Greek. It's Achilles versus Agamemnon, the great older Greek general who has the power and authority, and the younger, talented one who thinks that should be his now. The struggle between the two of them has fateful outcomes for the war as a whole, and we get to see this played out in great detail in Homer's story. Now, at the end of the war, and it does finally end, you've heard about the Trojan Horse. This makes its way into Homer's epic, not in the Iliad, but in the Odyssey, in fact, which is kind of interesting. We have a recounting of what had happened. Via the stratagem of the Trojan Horse, the Greeks infiltrate into the Trojan site. They pour out and unleash death on the unsuspecting Trojans who are asleep after celebrating and drinking lots of wine that they thought finally conquered the Greeks. Now, when the Greeks finally get in there, there's some pent-up aggression, 10 years of having been trapped and caught, and they go berserk. And this is something which they traditionally are not proud of. And they preserve the tradition, warts and all, to talk about their own men running riot and wreaking havoc on the Trojan citadel. That's standard stuff in antiquity. When you conquer someone, you get to clobber them, but there's clearly an understanding that one can do this too much, and the Greeks understood themselves as having gone too far in the Trojan story. Now, this is important because it leads to, for our purposes today, because it leads to the stories of the journeys home, the nostoi in Greek. The nostoi is the plural for a singular nostos. Nostos means a way home, trying to find your way back. Because the nastiness of the Trojan War was just quite so ugly, it took the Greeks a tremendous amount of twisting and turning to make their way back home. It's as though the amount of negative energy stirred up in Troy was so great that it was going to leak out and pollute the ways home of all of the great Greek figures. We've got lots of stories of journeys home that go terribly wrong, not least including Agamemnon's himself. He gets home after only a few days' quick journey home, but he finds that his wife has taken up a liaison with a person who is related to his family through incest and nasty fratricidal connections, who winds up having an affair with Agamemnon's wife. Then the two of them kill Agamemnon on his way home. There are other greats. Menelaus kind of makes it back, but limping with Helen, and they're never the same. Odysseus is the most famous of these journeys home, and his trip is difficult and hard, and it's told in Homer's Odyssey. Now, the epic tradition, I give you a few pages of Greek here, we'll work through some of the text. For those of you who have not yet learned your ancient Greek, I'll provide a translation. These are the first 10 lines of the Odyssey. And Homer sets a tradition, he's the first that we know of, he sets a tradition in which the entire theme of the epic poem is going to be contained in the first word. So let's take a look at this first word. Andra is the Greek term. It's man. And this is a male-gendered version of the human species. And in putting that as the first word in his epic, Homer is telling us that this is going to be a story about what it is to be one of these. To me, Homer brings himself into the epic. He wants something, he's ordering to sing to him. This term here in Greek is a verb in the imperative mood, saying, you out there, whoever you are, I'm about to name you, sing to me, the man. The person who's going to do the singing is the muse. This is a god that Homer envisions is going to come down literally into his own head. He will become the mouthpiece of the muse and speak these elegant, divinely inspired words to his audience. Now, the first marker that we get about what this man is all about is that he is of twists and turns. The Greek term there is polytropon. It's someone who can get out of any jam that they get into. They can sneak away. It also means, in the same way that twists and turns might mean, someone who's maybe a little too clever by half. Someone who gets into jams and weasels their way out of them. Homer builds Odysseus as a kind of character who's a trickster, as well as being a magnificent kind of heroic figure. This term also means something like resourcefulness. So as Odysseus is on his journeys, this key characteristic that he has of being polytropos is one that's going to let him get through whatever is going to get thrown at him in these journeys out on the sea. He's driven time and again off course. Now this term here, plankthe, is interesting. It's a verb that means being driven around. It's actually related to the term that in Latin, through Latin, becomes our term for planets, the wandering ones. This verb here is the word for wander. Now, we're going to get a word for home. It's going to come down here. We're about to get there. But notice that if we're carrying forward with the idea that the first word in the epic is the most important, well, the early words are more important than later words. So we've got man first, and before we get to home, we get to wandering. It's going to be part of what I'm going to suggest to you today, that Homer's story is not really a story about getting home. It's a story about where home is the goal, but in the end, it's the wandering that's the point. Now, once he'd plundered the hallowed heights of Troy, this tells us when Odysseus is going to make his move, and it tells us that Troy is very much an important back part of this story. Many cities of men he saw. This man travels from place to place to place. When he meets people who do things differently, he's afraid when appropriate, but mostly he's not afraid. Difference is not for him something that he goes running away screaming from. It's connected with him to knowledge. He learns their minds. Learning people's minds is what Odysseus does well. He's well known as crafty, trickster, intelligent, and the reason, Homer's giving us a story for this, the reason he is quite so intelligent is because of his wide breadth of experience with people who think differently than he does. Many pains he suffered, heartsick on the open sea, fighting to save his men's life and bring his comrades home, nostos. There's noston as the accusative version of it in Greek, but there's our Greek term for home. Shows up toward the end. Odysseus will suffer. We've seen pains that he'll suffer on the open sea, and it's part of what he's going to be to, yes, be resourceful and get out of jams and wander, but he's also going to suffer and endure through this. It's not going to be rosy and pretty. It's going to be quite ugly, in fact. But he could not save them from their disaster. His men, hard as he strove, the recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. The blind fools, they devoured the cattle of the sun, and the sun god wiped from sight the day of their return. Nostos. They don't get theirs. Nostimon, there. Launch out on his story, Muse, daughter of Zeus. Start from where you will. Sing for our time, too. Homer, who started off his epic invoking the Muse and bringing himself in the second word, now brings not only him, but his audience as well, us too, in a first-person plural that rounds out the first 10 lines. So now we're involved with Homer in the song. So this is going to be a poem about what it is to be a wanderer. Wandering comes before home. And in fact, as I'm going to claim, wandering is more the point. You have to be careful when you're wandering. You have to listen. You have to get ready to expand your empathy to people to whom you might not, or even creatures to whom you might not have imagined that you would ever have to do such a thing. His wanderings have invoked legions of people trying to peg exactly where he has been. I'll just toss up a couple maps here of potential sources for Odysseus' wandering. This one seems probably good enough, but it's got him going overland at the first start. Not sure why that is, but it's a proposition. So could be. And yeah, sure, maybe this land over here between the in the Straits of Messina could be connected to something like the Scylla and Charybdis. Others suggest different paths. Land of the Lotus Eaters is declared here for us in a 19th century scholarship to be absolutely right here. Island of the Winds there, et cetera, et cetera. This is more current scholarship on where the likely candidates for these places are, changed a little bit. Here's one of my favorites. Picture's a little pixelated, but it's got Odysseus wandering around through the whole Atlantic Ocean. It seems as though places that want to make sure that they're sewn together by the greatness of Odysseus' journey make sure that they find a mapping that shows how they're sewn together on the places of Odysseus' journey. I occasionally get books, oftentimes from folks who are not themselves scholars by profession, but in fits of enthusiasm, they've decided that they have to finally write up the true journey of Odysseus. And they find evidence and claim that they know exactly where he was. The problem is most of this is just fanciful. We have no clue where any of the places are that Homer talks about. Sure, we have found a way to locate Troy. If there's an island currently named that may well be where Odysseus' home was. We don't have corroborating evidence. There are places that he mentioned that could be mapped on, but the point of what I'm trying to suggest through this is it's not exactly the geography that's the important part. For Homer, there is great distance from home. That's the major thing. We're far, far away. That distance for Homer is not going to be measured in mileage. Mileage is not the way that you talk about it. The distance from home is going to be measured and calibrated in cultural difference. You start to run into people that do things differently than you, and then you know you're far away. The farthest away you get is a place where people do things the most differently from the way you would ever imagine. I'm going to also make at least one claim here. The connections with Odysseus here in Greece and the rest of the Mediterranean, as I've said, have been marked in this way by Homer as cultural difference and distance. But it's also important for us to note that the time that Homer was writing in was a time of great expansion. Greeks were sending colonies all across the Mediterranean, to the west and to the east. And here I've got Greek shipping routes and Greek colonial activity marked out between the years of 750 and 550. But you can see a far-flung people. The Greeks have a kind of wanderlust during this period and are off, making contact with other places. It's occasionally they will find indigenous populations, and guess what? Those indigenous populations do things differently than the Greeks do. So I think when Homer's trying to talk to us about a world where people are weird and strange, our best maps to look at are these maps of actual shipping routes that talk about Greek contact with strange peoples, rather than trying to map Odysseus' journey itself onto any particular area. The Greeks were working mostly in the northern Mediterranean. The Phoenicians at the same time are working in the southern Mediterranean. The Phoenicians may well play a part in Odysseus' story as well as famous traders who go by a different name. Now, I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of these stories. They're just amazing, amazing things. So we've got to, of course, jump into a few of these great places. We meet Odysseus in the middle of his wanderings. We start off in the middle of things. He is stuck on this island of Calypso, on which he's been, poor guy, trapped for 7 years, having to have sex with this beautiful nymph, sex goddess. He claims that he's suffering. People who read the story wonder. It's strange. Penelope seems to be fine with it. I mean, so it is. Now, of course, her fidelity is crucially important to the whole story, but Odysseus is understood to just have dalliances. He's busy with Calypso for 7 years, finally gets himself away, freed by a dictate of Zeus, who lets him go. He gets sprung loose. He wants to get home. This has been what he's been trying to do for all these years. He's hit by a storm. He lands in this island of Phaeacia that may well have a connection with Phoenicia. The names are similar, not etymologically sound connections, but ones that could be like a pun, the way you talk about someone using a name that sounds like them. Phaeacia is a land where Odysseus now lands, and this is a different place. It's different. He's not trapped like he was in Calypso's place. We know that awful things have happened to him, but we haven't heard about him yet. And he winds up washed up on this shore. He does good work there. He winds up really at death's door. He's almost expired from the amount of suffering and exposure that he's gone from all of his journeys. He lands on the ocean, or he lands on the edge of the water, and lasts the night. Thank goodness, he wasn't sure he would, and he makes connection with a young girl who's doing her laundry by the sea. This connection allows him to establish a contact, and that contact gives him a way to get in. He needs to find that network of connections that's going to allow him to make his way back. He is now alone. He is unshaven, unclean. He's starving. He has no clothes. So there's no way for him to enter back into polite society. He works his way in through flattery to this young woman, talks to her in a beautiful speech. She says, "Oh my goodness, that's a terrible thing you've been through." He makes up a total lie, which he does serially through the story. He doesn't want to give anything away. She winds up then giving him some clothes. First thing he needs. Now that he's clothed, he can let some of his other skills come into play. Perhaps, maybe, young woman, you could find a way for me to get to talk to your king. Sure, no problem. He just happens to be my father. So come with me. In they go to the land of the Phaeacians. Odysseus gets in there with a shroud of mist around him, thanks to his goddess who's looking after him, Athena. And the first thing he does as he gets in, the mist is lifted, and they look at him wondering, and he goes over and he grabs the queen's knees. Now, it might seem a bit forward, right? Making contact with a stranger by the knees. But what Odysseus is doing is a traditional Greek custom of securing for himself suppliant status. In getting hold of her knees, physical contact with the knees, he guarantees that she now, as a good Greek, as a good person, needs to give him hospitality. Now, once he's got that secured, he puts himself under the protection of Zeus himself. With that connection with Arete and with that connection with this royal household, he now engages in and puts himself in a position to get hospitality. Hospitality in the context of the Odyssey is a crucial part of what it is to be traveling around. When you wash up on a foreign shore, if the people that you're meeting are good at the tradition of hospitality, they will give you overwhelming hospitality. The more, the better. In doing this, you welcome the person, you say hello, let me wash your feet, would you like a bath, let's have a meal in your honor, we'll have a festival for you tomorrow, we'll have 4 days of games in your honor, we'll close down all the towns, do you want a city to live in, do you want to marry my daughter, no problem. Oh, and by the way, what's your name? This overwhelming hospitality, the more the better, shows that you are a good person. It also shows that you're wealthy enough to give this kind of thing. It has a demonstrative kind of capacity to it. And in securing then your status with this other person, it's assumed that next time you wash up on their shore, they'll take care of you. The Odyssey is built over and over again on this how to treat a stranger custom. Those that do it well are venerated. Those that don't do it well invoke all kinds of nasty reactions, including even disgust responses. We'll talk a little bit more about disgust. This is more PG-13, this part of the talk. We'll get to that than it is. So Odysseus now has secured his position. He starts to make a connection with the Phaeacians. They feed him, they clothe him, get his strength back. They're going to give him gifts. They also happen to be quite amazing in their own right. There's a very specific description of these folks. They're far away at the world's frontier, out of all human contact. So they're removed. However, Odysseus is going to run into other removed people, Cyclops not least, we're coming to him next, and people that are removed are usually wrong. It's people that are connected that are right. Now the Phaeacians are far removed, however, they're master shipbuilders and sailors. They're masters of the art of sailing. So they show themselves to have a certain repose, being separate from the hurly-burly of this or that city. They have their own civilization. However, they're not isolated. They're connected. That connectedness ensures that the hospitality is going to work out and that Odysseus is going to be treated well, and it also ensures that Odysseus is going to get from them everything that they can give. This is going to include a ride home. The Phaeacians, in their ability to navigate they have magical ships that steer themselves, we're told, so they can get anywhere. And again, it's not the distance. It's once Odysseus gets into a Phaeacian ship, he's just there. It's one sleep. He falls asleep before they leave, and by the time he wakes up, he's home. There is, for the Phaeacians, plenty of food. Their crops are irrigated by springs. They have gentle winds that make the food ripe just in its own. They've got an abundance of things that they never have to work for. They have these magic boats. The gods talk to them face to face. That's really strange. Gods don't talk to us anymore face to face in Homer's time. They used to back in the olden days, but not anymore. And if a human sees a god face to face now, you just get incinerated. We know what happened to Semele when she wound up having face-to-face contact with Zeus, her lover. That was a bad move. But these Phaeacians somehow are able to have contact with the gods face to face. In other words, they're marked as being strange right off. But here, they're strange in a kind of interesting and good way. Strange is also going to be potentially dangerous. We're going to see times when it's going to be, not least in our next story with the Cyclops. Now, as Odysseus is making his way in and making contact with these Phaeacians, they are curious about him after they've given him this overwhelming hospitality, and it really does go. This is the magnificent example of it. It goes for days, the hospitality for Zeus, or for Odysseus. At the end of which, the Phaeacian king leans over and says, "So, now, guest, that we've given you all this stuff, who are you?" At which point Odysseus, who has up till now been nameless, no one knows who he is. He's been without strength. He's been unsituated, completely unglued from the rest of society. Has been working his way in with the Phaeacians, but now he's going to fill in what comes about what he's all about. In order to mark his identity, he tells his name first. He tells his lineage, who his family is. He tells his home, and he tells his own personal history. Name, lineage, physical home, and his personal history. All of these are tied to this idea of a journey. The connection with the name Odysseus, it turns out that Odysseus' name means man of pain. He earns it in a journey. He goes to visit his maternal grandfather. They have this hunting trip. He's only about probably 13, 14 at the time, just becoming a man. He goes there and carries a spear, goes to kill a boar who comes charging at him and almost takes him out. But Odysseus kills the boar first. And when he does, all of the men on his maternal side hold him up and cheer him, Odysseus, man of pain. He's someone who has earned it, and that is his transition into manhood. He now has this marker of who he is by making the journey, by surviving through suffering. He has become who he is. It's the journey to his maternal grandfather that makes him who he is. His past, his lineage is connected to this story. His place where he's from, Ithaca. This is where Odysseus needs to get home to. And his past now, his own personal past now, becomes the substance of the story in the middle of the Odyssey. Everything I've told you up till now makes through the first 9 books of the story. The whole epic is 24. Books 9 through 12 are probably most of what makes it into the broader popular culture about the Odyssey. It's all the good stuff. It's these great, wonderful stories about Odysseus' wandering. Now, the stories that come up in 9 through 12 come up in groups of 3, and I want to talk about them as a whole first, and then I'll go into detail on a couple of them. They're all really good. In book 9, we have this first adventure with a group called the Ciconians. They're standard people like you and I, and Odysseus' men go in and clobber them and take their stuff and leave. Standard hero stuff. Then come the Lotus Eaters. They're like you and I. They seem kind of like us. You can have conversation with them. They're not trying to do you harm. They have customs that you can recognize. But all the daughters of the king marry the sons of the king. That's a little weird. And, and they have this special affiliate, we're going to get there with Aeolus. Lotus Eaters have this special attachment to this certain kind of food that they eat. They seem like you and I, but they have a special attachment to the wrong kind of thing. And they eat this food, and when they do, they just feel wonderful. The lotus makes them disconnected from the world, and for Odysseus, that's not a good thing. To kind of sit on your couch in disconnection, feeling really happy through chemical means is not something to be admired in Odysseus' story. And he then gets away from the Lotus Eaters, pulls his men away. Ciconians, Lotus Eaters. The third one in this group of 3 in book 9 is the Cyclops. Cyclops is a particular example of the kind of story of hospitality and it's the difficulties that sometimes come up in hospitality. Odysseus now is entering into, he's kind of worked his way into this strangeness of this world, and he gets into the world of the Cyclops, and things are very strange. This is a group of people. When he arrives, he sees smoke coming up out of the huts, and he wonders to himself, these people are strange. I wonder if they eat bread. That's something he often asks himself as he's coming up upon strange people. And what he's saying to himself are, do these people eat normal food? That's important. If they eat normal food, they're more like me, and I may not be quite so far away from home. He goes and talks more or goes and finds out a little bit more about this group, and there are some things that already look strange about them. He hasn't seen them yet, but they don't have cultivation, so they don't have settled farming. So they probably don't eat bread. That's strange. They don't have councils. They don't get together to solve their problems. They don't cooperate with each other. They don't have homes. They live in caves. This is weird. They don't have shipbuilding. Crucial. So they are isolated and far away. They also, we find out in Book 9, know nothing of proper hospitality. When Odysseus arrives, he's a little brash and talks to the Cyclops in a way that is not very polite, but in Homer's version of it, he kind of deserves it because the Cyclops is such a barbarian anyway. So while Odysseus is poking him, well, figuratively poking him at first, the Cyclops says, yeah, sure, I've got a, Odysseus, where's my gift? I'm a guest, right? You're supposed to give me a gift. And Cyclops says, sure, I've got a gift for you. I'm going to eat all of your men, but I'll eat you last. So in not just an overturning of hospitality, the Cyclops actually perverts hospitality. He does with gusto the opposite thing. Rather than invite someone in who's your new friend from far away who has strange ways, he actually, to have dinner and share a meal with you, he actually makes them his dinner and eats Odysseus' men. Cannibalism is a big theme in these adventures. The eating of another creature is something that gets poignant in this story, and the eating of people is shown to be this great source of revulsion and disgust. So that's the gift that Odysseus gets. You all probably already know the story. He winds up in a further perversion of the back and forth of hospitality. Odysseus says, okay, you're not going to give me a gift? Well, I'll give you one. Here's this really strong wine. And glutton that you are, I know you're just going to guzzle this down. And Cyclops does indeed guzzle down the really strong wine, passes out from incapacity because of the wine, vomiting up pieces of Odysseus' men. It's the PG-13 part. Odysseus takes a stake, puts it in the fire while the thing's passed out, pokes the eye out. Cyclops is not going to be able, and you all know they have only one eye. Cyclops is not going to be able to, now he'll be completely incapacitated. But this raises a problem, Odysseus is smart to realize. With this guy incapacitated, they're not going to be able to escape the cave. They don't have houses, they also don't have doors. So the Cyclops, in his shelter, has this cave, and he is this giant creature, is strong enough to roll a boulder to lock his front door, so to speak. And when he does now, there's no way out. So Odysseus incapacitating the Cyclops means now they have no way to get out. So Odysseus has to now game it out. This is going to be a long wait inside of the Cyclops' world. He's going to have to wait till the Cyclops opens the door, gets the boulder out of the way, then he and his men are going to have to sneak out. They attach themselves to the underside of sheep, and they just barely get out. The Cyclops is feeling only the top as they come by, and Odysseus makes it to the other side. Now, he gets out using his cleverness. When he does, he does something that's probably not wise, but you can kind of understand it in Homer's world. Getting away, he's never told the Cyclops his name, which keeps the Cyclops from being able to do anything quite nasty to Odysseus. It's as though it's like identity theft. He has no clue who this person is. He doesn't have the social security number. He can't do anything bad to him. But Odysseus, on the way out, wants to make sure that the glory of his deeds shines through for posterity and brags and says, Cyclops, if anyone ever asks who it is that incapacitated you and stole all your stuff, it's me, Odysseus. At which point Cyclops says, terrific, now I've got that. I'll call down a curse on you. Here's my final gift. My father is Poseidon, and he's going to hound you to the end of the world and try to kill you. Odysseus, So the Cyclops starts hurling boulders at the ship. The first one lands too far beyond the ship and washes the ship back towards shore. The men row as fast as they can. The second one he hurls lands just short of the ship, which squirts it forward. And Odysseus and his men get away. It's their first encounter with what is truly not Greek, not them, and it's emblematized by this awful creature, knows nothing of the ways of hospitality, doesn't know how to treat strangers, and even perverts that custom by turning them into food. It's a universal law in my mythology class. It's not a good thing to be food. There's a corollary, thou shalt not metabolize thy neighbor. So Odysseus gets away and moves on to the next set of three stories: Aeolus, the Circe episode. Aeolus, the Laestrygonians, and the Circe episode. I'll go quickly through the first two. The first two in any of these groups of three are very short. The Caconians and the Lotus Eaters, very short. Cyclops is the long one. Same thing with the next three. We've got two short ones: Aeolus, the Laestrygonians, and then the Circe episode. Circe episode, same kind of cadence starts to happen. Odysseus washes up on shore, smoke coming out of huts, got to go find what that is. I wonder if they eat bread. Guess what? It's not clear what they're going to eat up there. He gets up to Circe's palace, and she has a magical potion that turns his men into pigs. Now, this is already a problem, right? You've got a goddess who can incapacitate your men by turning them into non-humans. That's a problem. The problem's even more pronounced, though, because pigs are, for Greeks, anyone who could eat meat, who had a few pennies in their pocket to eat meat, pigs would be the thing you would eat. It was the most affordable and most widely consumed of all meat products. So when Circe turns the men into pigs, she's basically turning them into, the contemporary equivalent would be turning them into hot dogs. They have a big sign on their foreheads that say, eat me, I'm ready to be eaten, right? When she turns them into pigs, she's turning them into food. So once again, Odysseus and his men in this intense episode in the Odyssey find themselves in the position of being with people that don't share their customs, they don't eat the things that they eat, and they want to make them into their dinner. It's a hostile world of strangeness out there unless you're very clever and resourceful, which again Odysseus is. With some help from divine intervention, Odysseus overcomes Circe with his manliness and his warrior ethic, and he threatens her with a sword, and instantly she goes weak in the knees and says, all I really wanted was to make love to you, so that's great, let's do that now. So Circe has a love affair with Odysseus. That one lasts a whole year. And that ends that episode. Odysseus has figured out a way out of this particular problem. Circe then gives him the intelligence that he needs. You're in trouble, you've had a problem. The reason you've had a problem is because it's Poseidon now that's been after you. You've got to figure out a way to undo this curse. The only way you're going to figure this out is if you go down and talk to Tiresias. Well, there's a problem. Tiresias is dead. So, how can you talk to Tiresias? The only way you can talk to Tiresias is if you go to the farthest of far places you could imagine, to the underworld itself. Odysseus makes his way to the underworld. We're up to book 11 of the Odyssey, and finds there pretty amazing things. There are connections that he finds with the lost heroes. He sees his mother down there. He learns from people when he gets down there. There's Agamemnon. Agamemnon, what are you doing down here? I'm dead. My wife killed me. His guts are spilling all out. What happened to you? Well, just be careful when you go home, Agamemnon says. Odysseus has the message, right? So he finds all these others in the underworld, makes connections with them, but he really needs to go and find Tiresias. He gets them to start talking to him. They're insubstantial shades, though, so they need some extra to get them more connected, and they actually drink this potion in front of him that's like blood. They crave it. They want to have blood in them, which gives them vivification so that they can engage in conversation. They have their conversations with him. Tiresias talks to him, and Tiresias tells him, you have upset Poseidon. There's only one way to mollify his curse. You have to go take an oar from your town, take it so far inland that people mistake it for a winnowing fan. Now, for those of you who haven't, I don't have it, sorry. For those of you that haven't been engaged in farming or granary for a while, a winnowing fan is something that looks like an oar. It's a flat piece of wood with a long handle, and you pick up the cracked wheat and swish it around in the wind, and the chaff blows away and the kernels of wheat stand still. So a winnowing fan allows you to get the sustenance out of the wheat that you can use then for your bread. So what Tiresias is saying is you have to take an oar, an implement that is used in the sea, and bring it so far away from the sea that people don't even recognize it. They have no clue what the sea is. When they don't recognize it, you'll know that you've got far enough away, and it's there that you should build a temple for Poseidon. Poseidon wants his glory spread. He wants even people in the farthest inland of the world to be worshiping him. So far inland that they don't know what an oar is. Build a temple to Poseidon there, and he will forgive you. So Odysseus has his marching orders, and he is settled now on what he needs to do. He needs to get himself home, and after he does, he needs to appease Poseidon. Then the final chunk of episodes come up. The sirens show up here, the Scylla and Charybdis, again, quick. And then we get the cattle of the sun, where Odysseus and his men need to, or get themselves locked on an island where the winds are unfavorable. They're stuck there. As the days and weeks and months go by, they run out of stores and they start to starve. Sitting in front of them is the most glistening food a person could imagine. It's cattle. Now, cattle were an aristocratic meat. They were extremely expensive. You had to control great amounts of land in order to sustain the cattle. The meat was thought to be delicious. We already shows up earlier in the epic, one of the great, very wealthy kings has a sacrifice of 9 sacrifices of 9 bulls each. 81 bulls are sacrificed for a festival earlier on. That's tremendous wealth. So these are already marked as an aristocratic meat. They're something you could have. So these men, as they're starving, have in front of them these most beautiful food that they could imagine. Just hurts them, they're in perfect condition. They can't wait to eat them. The problem is they've been told by Tiresias and others in the underworld that when they get to the island of the cattle of the sun, they may not eat Helios' cattle. And if they do, there will be awful retribution. Odysseus sticks to the dictate and does not eat. The men do. And when they do, they make a food crime. Now, you may think, and the gods come down and blot them out. The men don't make it home because of eating of the cattle of the sun. You might think that's a kind of petty and vengeful god who would go around and just declare off limits, this perfectly good food, and then kill the men instead of them in recompense for them just having only sustained themselves and not allowing themselves to die of hunger. But given the context of what we've been talking about and how strangeness is marked by customs that aren't quite yours, what the men have done is engaged in a food crime. They've eaten something that's not food. That's a problem. You're not supposed to eat something that's not food. It means that you're not one of us. It means that you're not home, you're far away, and you're in a potentially hostile environment. And when you commit a food crime in Odysseus' world, that's a terrible, terrible thing. So the men, since they've eaten what's not food, get blotted out. Now, Odysseus does eventually make it home. The Phaeacian ship lands. He gets to Ithaca. The second half of the story, which I'll move through quickly, has him making his way to Ithaca. Now, he's been all over the universe, literally, to hell and back, in the earlier part of the story. The second half of the story has him trying to make his way through a world that is equally dangerous, equally tricky, and I think probably even more difficult for him to negotiate. And that's his own home, which has now been turned into hostile territory. It's a journey for Odysseus, the second half of the book. When I read this with my undergrads, I always have to queue up for them. I mean, the first 12 books, it's all pyrotechnics and excitement. Everything's blowing up and bouncing around, and the monsters show up, and things are strange. You get to Ithaca, and it's just people talking. I try to remind them that what's happening in those conversations is Odysseus working his way back into that society that's deeply corrupt. And that is much trickier than any external swashbuckling that he has to do. Those are physical challenges. These require physical strength, but even more mental strength. Odysseus washes up on the shore on the edge of Ithaca. I've drawn Ithaca like an oval here, just because that's how I drew it. He winds up on the edge of Ithaca. This is book 12. By book 14, he makes it to the inner part of Ithaca, which is Odysseus' own external courtyard. The Greek term for that is an aule. And here, Odysseus is there as a beggar, disguised, going around begging for scraps, wondering if he can pick up any information about what's happening here. He's totally mistreated by the suitors. They've been camped out here in great violation of hospitality. Penelope's opened up her stores to them as guests. Well, they've taken advantage of it, and years and years and years they've stayed there. They won't even give Odysseus a scrap because they're shown to be the kind of people that can't give hospitality. Odysseus now is lurking around the edges of this world. He catches the eye of Penelope. She sees that there's this stranger here that has a kind of resemblance to her husband, but she herself is very circumspect, is not about to jump out there and say hello. A lot of people have been pretending to be Odysseus. Plus, who knows what he's been doing all this time if it really is him. So she's cautious, and he's cautious, and they've got to make their way back to each other, signaling in this hostile environment back and forth between each other, sending secret messages to kind of tip off. If you're really Odysseus, you'd know this. If you're really Penelope, you'd know that. And it's that kind of careful back and forth that earns Odysseus further and further inward movement. Starting on the Aule, that's not a very public place, or that's not a very private place. It's like the front porch or something of a house. People would come by there to do business with the family. People would make connections. They could be friends, could be strangers. It's a kind of place that Odysseus, just as a stranger, could kind of wander around in. He is eventually invited by Penelope into the oikos. These are the rooms of the house itself inside of the Aule. When Odysseus, and it's from this word that we get our word economy, the management of your household. The oikos is this, represented in this square here, is the rooms. Penelope invites Odysseus in. You, stranger, come on in. A little forward that she would do this. And in fact, he comes back to her and says, I'll come in, but only if I can do it at night. She says, oh, all right, come on in at night. Little forward, little strange, not daytime hours, nighttime, firelight, more intimate setting, only the two of them are visible to each other. It's just what he wants. And she realizes that if he's truly Odysseus, that should be what he wants. So she lets it happen. They have a conversation back and forth. He lies through his teeth. She says, well, yeah, and at the same time, he claims during that conversation, I met this guy Odysseus. And in fact, he's really nearby. He's only a few islands away. He's at Delos, this oracular site, and he's asking the oracle there whether he should come back in disguise or just come back, in the open. So Odysseus is nearby, and he's deciding whether he should reveal himself, he's saying. She says, oh, well, that's interesting. Of course, you could be lying, so why don't you go away? So she sends him out of the house, and he has to go and sleep outside, and has to try to figure out a way to make his way back in. He's trying to get from the oikos now inside the house. There are further inner chambers that Odysseus needs to earn his right to get into. Inside of the oikos is the innermost of the rooms of the house. That's the bedroom of Odysseus and Penelope. That's where Odysseus wants to be. Even further, he wants to make it to his own bed, which is going to be hard. He needs to prove himself. He does finally with the arrow, stringing the arrow. Penelope sets out a contest, says if someone can string Odysseus' bow and send an arrow through axe heads, that person is good enough for me to marry, so go ahead and do that. Well, she says this in public in overhearing of Odysseus to say, guess what? Your bow's going to be here tomorrow, so get ready. Odysseus takes that cue, has all of the other weapons in the household put away, and knows that eventually he'll get his hand on his bow. And when he does, kills all the suitors. Penelope is absent when all this is happening. She comes back. Everyone says, hey, it's really Odysseus, it's really Odysseus. She says, no, he hasn't proved himself yet. Sure, he strung the bow. That's fine. A lot of people are strong. He looks like Odysseus. Not enough. We have secret signs. Only he will know. And don't tell me otherwise. The final coming together that they have, everyone's cheering. He's like, this is it. It's got to happen. She says, no. He's got to pass a final test. And we're going to do that tomorrow. But before we do, I will treat this person as an honored guest. Bring out my own bed so that the stranger can sleep on it out here in this oikos. Bring out my own bed so the stranger can sleep on it, she says to the nursemaids, to the handmaids. At which point Odysseus jumps up, says, you can't bring out your bed because I made that bed and it's anchored into the ground. Odysseus made the bed out of a living tree that's grown and rooted in the soil beneath his house. It's anchored around it and built into it. It's immovable. Symbolic value. Odysseus' bed is immovable. Now, so in this stratagem, Penelope has made sure to prove that it's Odysseus who's there. Only Odysseus would know. She has also at the same time, which delights him, given him assurance that she has kept up what the woman's end of the bargain is supposed to be in classical Greece, not the men's. She's not let anyone else inside of that room. Had she let anyone else inside of the room, the secret would be out, and it would be public knowledge. It could be public knowledge that the bed's not movable. In using that as a way to prove him, she's also told him that I've kept this code secret, so I know that it's you, and now you also know that I've been faithful to you this whole time you've been gone. Odysseus is thrilled. They come back together, and he's finally made it home. So we should have in this a kind of closing. We've got a story of a journey and Odysseus on his way home. The Nostos is complete. However, this is only book 23, not book 24. The two of them come back and reunite and have conversations, and all that happens. And then in book 24, Odysseus has got other things he's got to settle. So he goes off and starts to talk to his father. I've been away. I'm so glad to be back. And, you know, he tests his father, too, strangely. Treats him like some kind of weird stranger, which is weird. And then there's this cataclysmic battle. You hear about the underworld, all the dead souls of the suitors battle with people down below. They hear about it, and they tell them about what happened upstairs, up high. Then there's a battle up on the surface as the relatives of the suitors try to battle Odysseus's men. Divine intervention, that stops, and Odysseus is off, got to find a way to plant his oar somewhere. What's, you know, that's the end. What? Shouldn't have ended at 23. He's back home. The point of the story, I think, and it comes through in this end, and it also was already present at the beginning of the story, is not that getting home is the point. The point of the story is that traveling and journeying is part of what it means to be human. And in fact, it's probably an ineluctable part of what it means to be human. We have no choice over this. We are, I think, Homer is telling us, by nature, wanderers. Home is not where it's at. This is linked, I think, in the way the Greek works out. The word for homecoming we know as nostos. There's a good English word for this that's built on it, nostalgia. Just as nostalgia is a pretend memory of a glossy past that never really existed, so also a nostos is a hope that's never going to be fulfilled of finding a true place of belonging. We are wandering creatures. We move around. Why is this? Well, I think it's just because we're just so smart. We're stuck. We make up our own world, and when we make it up, it's not something that's natural to which we can claim that we belong. I want to close just by referencing one final potential way that the Odyssey could have worked, but that it didn't. Classical Greek heroes, many of them, had a tradition behind them of something called autochthony. It's a good word. I always tell my students, write this down, just toss it out in your job interviews. You will mark yourself instantly as an educated person. Autochthony means the idea that human beings originally grew up out of the ground itself. Traditions that work in here are across the board of ancient Greek heroes. There are many of them that are like this, that show themselves to have been connected to land. This is a wonderful theory if you have it. It shows that you belong somewhere. After all, your family grew right up out of it. It shows that that land belongs to you, not someone else, so you can claim possession over it. Aristocrats love the idea that they're connected to the land. That still happens today. People will tell me I'm a 19th generation Bostonian. Great. I'm a 5,000th generation hominid. How do you feel about that? You know, and then you get to these things where people, you know, the length of time in which you are in a place establishes your connection to it. Well, there's mistakes in history that make that a little bit complicated, including our own past in our own country, but so it goes. Autochthony is an idea that gives you a connection to the land that's rooted and that's clear and that's precise. Heroes in this tradition typically have problems with their feet. It's like when you pluck a plant, the bottom part is messed up, so they have messed up feet. Achilles, heel. That's a problem. It belongs to the autochthonous tradition. Oedipus, swollen feet, bound together. This tradition. Jason comes out of the ship, loses his sandal. He's got messed up feet. These heroes that have autochthonous traditions have messed up feet. Odysseus, he's perfect for this kind of a tradition. He belongs to, doesn't show up. Homer has no interest in autochthony. He doesn't even mention it when he's talking about all the other heroes in the story. He ignores any autochthonous traditions of them. I don't think Homer thinks that any of us particularly belong anywhere. We've earned, by our magnificent intellects, the ability to be everywhere. But at the same time, we pay the price for that, for not quite ever being able to be home, but always being on a journey. Thank you very much.